In 1911, a company was born that would go on to shape wars, governments, economies, and the very machines that now run your life. You may not see its logo every day, but you live inside the world it built. Its name is IBM. How does a company survive for more than a century when most companies don't survive a decade? How does a brand rise before computers exist and still dominate when artificial intelligence takes over? And what does it mean when the quietest company in the room is the one controlling the architecture of the future? To understand IBM, we have to go back to a world before screens, before software, before Silicon Valley even had a name. This is not a story about gadgets. This is a story about systems, about power hidden behind machines, about a company that didn't chase attention because it was busy designing the structure of civilization itself. This is the origin of IBM. In 1911, 4 small companies merged to form something called the Computing Tabulating Recording Company. There were no laptops, no internet, no code, only punch cards, mechanical tabulators, machines designed to count. But in the early 1900s, counting was power. Governments needed census data, railroads needed logistics tracking, insurance companies needed risk calculations, and whoever controlled information controlled decisions. IBM wasn't born in Silicon Valley, it was born in bureaucracy. And that may have been its greatest advantage, because while other companies dreamed of products, IBM dreamed of infrastructure. Then came Thomas J. Watson Sr., a salesman, charismatic, relentless, obsessed with discipline. He didn't just sell machines, he sold culture. 3 letters defined IBM under Watson: think. Employees wore suits, spoke carefully, moved deliberately. IBM wasn't chaotic like startups today. It was structured, rigid, almost military, and that rigidity built trust. Governments trusted IBM, corporations trusted IBM. Even during the Great Depression, IBM grew. While others collapsed, IBM expanded. Why? Because in uncertain times, organizations cling to systems, and IBM was the master of systems. By the 1930s, IBM machines were processing data at scales never seen before. Punch cards became the bloodstream of bureaucracy. Entire economies ran on paper fed through IBM machines. Then came World War II. And here's where things get complicated. IBM technology was used by Allied forces, but its European subsidiaries also operated in Nazi Germany. Machines that tracked populations, machines that categorized identities, machines that helped organize logistics at terrifying efficiency. IBM was not just counting numbers, it was counting people, and history would later ask, when does technology become responsibility? But IBM kept growing, because power does not slow down to reflect, it adapts. After the war, the world entered a new era, electronic computing. And once again, IBM didn't invent the first computer. It didn't need to. IBM perfected it. In 1952, IBM introduced the IBM 701. It wasn't sleek, it wasn't personal, it was massive, room-sized, cold, industrial, but it worked. And governments lined up, corporations lined up, because IBM didn't sell dreams, it sold certainty. By the 1960s, IBM controlled nearly 70% of the computer market. 70%. In modern terms, that's unthinkable. It wasn't just winning, it was the system. And when a company becomes the system, something dangerous happens. It stops fearing competition. It starts believing it is inevitable, and inevitability is the beginning of vulnerability. By the late 1970s, a new generation was rising. Young, reckless, garage-built. They didn't wear suits, they didn't ask permission, and they didn't respect IBM. One of them was named Steve Jobs, another, Bill Gates. IBM had built the throne, but it was about to invite its own challengers inside the palace. And in the next decade, the most powerful company in the world would make a decision that would change technology forever. By the late 1970s, something unusual was happening. Computers were shrinking. They were leaving laboratories, leaving governments, leaving corporate basements, and entering garages. Young engineers were building machines for individuals, personal computers. To IBM, this looked small, almost childish. Why would anyone need a computer at home? IBM built systems for banks, for militaries, for Fortune 500 companies, not for teenagers. But the market was moving, and when even a giant feels the ground shift beneath it, it must respond. So in 1980, IBM did something rare. It moved fast. Instead of spending years engineering everything internally, IBM chose a shortcut. It would build a personal computer, quickly, using off-the-shelf components. And for the operating system, it outsourced to a small, relatively unknown company, Microsoft. That decision seemed efficient, rational, harmless. It was anything but. When IBM approached Microsoft, Bill Gates did not yet own an operating system, but he promised one. Then he acquired QDOS for $50,000, modified it, and licensed it to IBM as MS-DOS. Here is the detail that changed history. IBM did not demand exclusivity. Microsoft retained the right to license MS-DOS to other manufacturers. IBM believed its brand was the power. It thought hardware was king. It underestimated software. That single oversight allowed Microsoft to build an empire on top of IBM's architecture. Within years, clone manufacturers flooded the market. They copied IBM's hardware design, but they all needed MS-DOS. Microsoft became the standard. IBM became just another manufacturer. For the first time in its history, IBM had built the foundation of a revolution it did not control. And control was something IBM had never lived without. The 1981 IBM PC was a massive success. Consumers trusted the name, businesses adopted it rapidly. But IBM had made its architecture open. That openness, intended to accelerate growth, became its vulnerability. Competitors reverse-engineered the BIOS. IBM Compatible became the new standard. Soon, companies like Compaq were producing faster, cheaper machines, all running Microsoft software. IBM had created the blueprint, others optimized it, and in technology, the optimizer often wins. For the first time in decades, IBM was not the dominant force in its own category. It was being outpaced by younger, leaner, more aggressive players. And inside IBM, something unfamiliar began to grow: fear. Meanwhile, regulators were watching. In 1969, the US government had filed an antitrust lawsuit against IBM. The accusation: monopoly control. The case dragged on for 13 years. Though eventually dropped, the psychological damage remained. IBM became cautious, conservative, risk-averse. It had once been bold. Now it was careful. While startups moved with instinct, IBM moved with committees, and the world was accelerating. By the early 1990s, disaster struck, losses mounted, revenue declined, the mainframe business shrank, personal computing profits were thin. In 1993, IBM reported an $8 billion loss. At the time, the largest corporate loss in American history, $8 billion. For a company that once controlled 70% of computing, the media called it a dinosaur. Too big, too slow, too arrogant. Employees feared layoffs, Investors feared collapse, and for the first time in nearly a century, IBM faced something it had not prepared for: irrelevance. This was not just financial decline, it was existential. Had the company that built modern computing lost the ability to see the future? Or worse, had it become trapped inside its own legacy? Because here is the danger of dominance. When you build the system, you begin to believe the system cannot exist without you. But history is ruthless. It replaces giants without apology. And in 1993, IBM stood on the edge, a 100-year-old titan, bleeding, vulnerable, and about to make a decision that would either destroy it forever or reinvent it completely. The board did something unthinkable. Instead of choosing a lifelong IBM executive, they hired an outsider, a man from RJR Nabisco, a company known for cookies and tobacco. His name was Lou Gerstner. He didn't understand computers. He didn't speak in technical jargon. But he understood something IBM had forgotten. And what he was about to change would redefine not only IBM, but the entire future of corporate power. In 1993, when Lou Gerstner walked into IBM headquarters, he was not welcomed as a savior. He was viewed as an anomaly, an outsider. IBM had always promoted from within. Executives wore history like a badge. They spoke the language of mainframes. Gerstner did not. He had never run a technology company. He did not know how to code. He did not pretend to. And that was precisely why he saw what others couldn't. IBM's problem was not engineering. It was identity. For decades, IBM believed it was a hardware company, machines, metal, mainframes. But Gerstner saw something different. He saw clients drowning in complexity, networks connecting, software multiplying, systems colliding. Companies didn't just need machines anymore. They needed integration. They needed someone to connect everything. And IBM, ironically, had built every piece of that puzzle. It just didn't realize it. Gerstner's first radical decision was simple. He refused to break IBM apart. Many analysts believed the company should split into smaller entities: hardware, software, services. But Gerstner saw the future in unity. He believed IBM's strength was its ability to provide end-to-end solutions, one throat to choke, one system to trust. But first, he had to dismantle something else: arrogance. IBM's internal culture had become ceremonial, layered, slow. Employees feared risk. Innovation moved through bureaucracy. Gerstner removed dress codes, encouraged cross-division collaboration, shifted focus from internal pride to customer survival, and most importantly, he changed the question. IBM stopped asking, "What machine should we build?" and started asking, "What problem are you trying to solve?" That subtle shift changed everything. Then came the internet, mid-1990s. Many tech companies saw it as a curiosity, a toy. IBM saw something larger. It wasn't just a network, it was a business infrastructure. While others raced to sell websites, IBM positioned itself as the backbone: servers, consulting, enterprise solutions. IBM didn't want to be the flashy startup. It wanted to be the invisible architect. By the late 1990s, IBM Global Services became the largest IT services company in the world. The company that once sold punch cards was now selling transformation. And quietly, profits returned. Not explosive, not glamorous, but steady, strategic, durable. In 2005, IBM made another bold move. It sold its personal computer division to Lenovo, the same business that once challenged Microsoft. Gone. To many, this looked like surrender. But it was precision. IBM was exiting low-margin hardware. and moving toward high-margin intelligence, data analytics, enterprise software, cloud infrastructure, and then artificial intelligence. Watson, named after the company's legendary leader. Watson wasn't just a product, it was a signal. IBM was declaring its next battlefield, not devices, not consumer apps, but cognition. Machine intelligence assisting human decision-making, healthcare diagnostics, financial risk modeling, legal research. IBM wasn't building what you hold in your hand. It is building what influences what you decide. And that influence is quieter, but deeper. By the 2000s, IBM was no longer the loudest company in technology. It didn't launch viral gadgets. It didn't dominate headlines like Apple. It didn't disrupt culture like Google, but it owned patents. More US patents annually than any other company for decades. It powered banks, governments, airlines, hospitals. If Apple shaped consumer identity, IBM shaped institutional reality. It had reinvented itself, again, not by being faster, but by being fundamental. And yet, even reinvention has limits, because the world was shifting again toward cloud-native giants, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, companies that moved with speed IBM once lacked. And once again, a question emerged. Was IBM adapting fast enough, or was history preparing another lesson? In 2018, IBM made its largest acquisition ever, $34 billion. A bet on the future of cloud computing, a gamble that would determine whether IBM remained an architect of the digital age or faded into legacy status. The company that survived wars, recessions, and revolutions was now facing something different. A world where power moves at algorithmic speed, and we confront the ultimate question: can a century-old empire compete in a decade-old battlefield? In 2018, IBM made the largest acquisition in its history, $34 billion, to acquire Red Hat. Not a flashy consumer brand, not a viral startup, an enterprise open-source software company. To some investors, it looked desperate, to others, strategic. But to understand this move, you must understand something deeper. The cloud wars were already underway. Amazon Web Services had defined the battlefield. Microsoft Azure was scaling aggressively. Google was innovating at hyperspeed. IBM was behind, not irrelevant, but behind. And in modern technology markets, being behind is dangerous because momentum compounds. Red Hat represented something IBM lacked: cloud-native credibility, open-source trust, developer loyalty. This wasn't just a purchase, it was an attempt to merge legacy strength with modern velocity. But integration is never simple, especially when culture collides. IBM, structured, disciplined, corporate. Red Hat, decentralized, open, community-driven. Could they coexist, or would one consume the other? IBM did not try to outspend Amazon. It did not try to outmarket Microsoft. It chose a different strategy: hybrid cloud. Instead of forcing companies to abandon their existing infrastructure, IBM offered integration. Keep your private systems, add public cloud capabilities, connect everything securely. For banks, for governments, for industries that cannot afford reckless disruption. IBM's pitch was subtle. We understand complexity. We've always understood complexity. While startups chase speed, IBM sells stability. And stability has a market, especially in Europe, in regulated industries, in conservative financial systems. But here is the tension. The future rewards innovation, but it also punishes fragility. And IBM lives at the intersection of both. IBM is no longer the largest tech company. It no longer defines consumer culture. Teenagers don't line up for IBM products, but that was never its role. IBM operates where attention is scarce, where headlines don't reach, in government contracts, in enterprise architecture, in the back end of systems that must not fail. Yet the market measures relevance differently now. Market capitalization, growth rate, media presence. And in those metrics, IBM looks quieter. Some call it mature, some call it slow, some call it forgotten. But here is the paradox. The companies that shape daily life are visible. The companies that shape structural life are invisible. IBM chose invisibility. But invisibility comes with a cost, because when you operate in the background long enough, people forget you built the stage. Think about this. IBM helped build the Social Security system. It powered early space missions. It supported banking infrastructures that hold trillions of dollars. It led in patents for decades. It trained generations of engineers. It shaped corporate culture in America for over 100 years. Few companies survived 10. IBM survived wars, the Great Depression, the dot-com bubble, the 2008 financial crisis, and the transition from mechanical punch cards to quantum computing research. That continuity is not accidental, it is engineered. IBM does not chase revolutions, it absorbs them. And perhaps that is its greatest strength, or its greatest limitation. IBM teaches us something uncomfortable. Success does not always belong to the loudest. Power does not always belong to the newest. Sometimes, the true architect of a system is not the one celebrated in headlines, but the one designing the foundation quietly. IBM built the early framework of digital civilization. It miscalculated, it stumbled, it almost collapsed. And yet, it restructured itself again and again, not through charisma, but through discipline, not through disruption, but through durability. So here is the question. In a world obsessed with speed, is longevity the ultimate innovation? When the next technological revolution arrives, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, decentralized systems, will it be the startups that dominate, or the century-old institutions that understand infrastructure better than anyone else? IBM may not control your phone, but it may influence the systems that control the world around you. And perhaps the most powerful empires are the ones you barely notice. Because when power becomes invisible, it becomes foundational. And foundations are the hardest things to replace. This was the story of IBM, but the real story is larger. Every empire believes it understands the future until the future arrives differently. The question is not whether IBM will survive. The question is, what kind of world requires a company like IBM? And what kind of world renders it unnecessary? Because somewhere, right now, another company is building the next foundation. And history has never promised that yesterday's architect will design tomorrow.